We think we know the story of ancient seafaring, but what if the textbooks are wrong? How do we truly know what a wooden ship built 2,000 years ago could actually do? The answer lies not in dusty manuscripts, but in a daring modern practice called experimental archaeology. This video will show you how building and sailing full-scale replicas has shattered long-held assumptions, revealing both the astonishing capabilities and the brutal, unforgiving limits faced by every ancient mariner. You will see how these floating experiments have overturned narratives, pushing modern crews to their absolute breaking point to answer one profound question. What were the real boundaries of courage and technology on the open ocean? How did a simple change in the wind mean the difference between finding a new world and vanishing forever? By the end, you will understand the ancient sea not as a blank space on a map, but as a complex, demanding partner in human history. What do you believe was the greatest barrier our ancestors faced when they looked toward the horizon? This entire field rests on a powerful, deceptively simple idea. A reconstructed ancient ship is not a museum display or a movie prop. It is a floating hypothesis. Every plank shaped by hand, every rope woven from natural fibers, every sail cut to a historical pattern represents a specific claim about the past. We are saying, this is how we believe they built it, and therefore, this is what we believe it could do. The true purpose is not to marvel at a perfect replica, but to send that hypothesis into the laboratory of the real world. The open sea does not care about our theories. It will test every assumption with wind, wave, and relentless pressure. The goal shifts from proving ancient builders were brilliant, which they often were, to uncovering the precise box they had to work within. What materials were available? What tools did they master? What knowledge of currents and stars was absolutely essential for survival? In this unique form of archaeology, failure is not a setback. It is a breakthrough when a replica proves dangerously unstable in a moderate swell, or when a hand-stitched sail tears under a strong wind. The experiment has succeeded brilliantly. It has identified a hard limit, a line in the sand the ancients themselves could not cross. We learn not just what was possible, but more importantly, what was impossible. Each discovered limit helps us redraw the map of the ancient world, showing not where they could theoretically go, but where the ocean itself would have said no. One of the most dramatic tests of this method unfolded not with grand wooden galleys, but with a vessel made of reeds. In the late 1960s, the legendary explorer Thor Heyerdahl turned his attention to ancient Egypt. His hypothesis was bold and controversial. He proposed that long before the pyramids, people in North Africa could have used boats built from bundled papyrus reeds to undertake vast ocean voyages, potentially connecting early cultures across the Mediterranean and even the Atlantic. To test this idea, he did not simply write a paper. He and a team built a boat exactly as he believed the ancients would have, using only papyrus reeds, wooden poles, and natural rope, based on ancient drawings and traditional techniques still remembered by a few communities. They named the vessel Ra after the Egyptian sun god and set sail from Morocco, aiming for the Caribbean. The very construction was a revelation. The reeds, when fresh, provided incredible buoyancy. The boat was essentially a floating basket, flexible and surprisingly resilient to waves. For weeks, Ra performed well, carried by currents Heyerdahl believed ancient sailors could have used. But then the experiment entered its most critical phase. The sea began its relentless audit. The bundled reeds, constantly saturated, started to absorb more and more water. Despite the crew's frantic efforts to adjust ropes and redistribute weight, the stern began to sag. The material itself was slowly losing its buoyant integrity, a process called waterlogging. After 55 days and over 3,000 miles, with the boat literally sinking beneath them, The crew had to be rescued just short of their goal. The voyage was hailed as a brave attempt, but for experimental archaeology, it was a profound success. It had identified a fundamental physical limit. A reed boat in the open ocean had a finite lifespan measured in weeks before the material succumbed. This wasn't about skill or courage, it was a simple fact of physics. Heyerdahl, undeterred, built a second reed ship, Tigris, a few years later to refine the design. While it demonstrated impressive coastal and riverine capabilities, the same ultimate limit remained. These floating experiments powerfully reshaped academic theories. They showed that such vessels were likely masters of the Nile and could manage cautious hops along coastlines where fresh reeds and repairs were possible. But a direct, sustained crossing of a major ocean like the Atlantic, the sea itself delivered a verdict. The reeds would simply drink themselves too heavy, setting a boundary that no amount of ancient knowledge could overcome. This wasn't a failure of human imagination, but a discovery of the ocean's rules. A ship, no matter how perfectly reconstructed, is an empty shell without the crew that gives it life. This leads us to the second, and perhaps more humbling, frontier of experimental archaeology: the human limit. Modern sailors can step onto a replica with centuries of accumulated maritime science in their minds, from weather forecasts to GPS coordinates. But to truly understand the ancient experience, researchers must strip that knowledge away. The most revealing experiments place a modern crew inside an ancient reality, armed only with the tools and techniques that would have been available millennia ago. This means navigating by the sun and stars alone, reading subtle shifts in wind and wave patterns, and surviving on a diet of what could be preserved in a wooden barrel for weeks. The goal is not to play-act history, but to measure the immense cognitive and physical cost of operating at the very edge of known technology. Suddenly, the challenge transforms. It is no longer just about whether the ship can handle a storm, but whether exhausted, hungry people can make flawless decisions when that storm arrives. The replica becomes a time machine for stress, revealing that ancient seafaring was a relentless marathon of labor and concentration. Every sail adjustment requires back-breaking work with ropes and pulleys. Every night watch demands absolute mental clarity to track celestial markers through cloud cover. Researchers on these voyages document a steep decline in reaction times and judgment after just a few days of broken sleep and manual labor, a state they call maritime fatigue. This is where theory meets the trembling human hand. An error in celestial calculation that a rested student could correct in a classroom becomes a catastrophic, irreversible mistake on a moonless night in the open ocean. These experiments teach us that the boundaries on ancient maps were not just drawn by stormy seas or weak hulls. They were drawn by the fundamental limits of the human body and mind under extreme duress. The true vessel was the crew itself, and its most critical component was an unbroken chain of sound judgment, maintained against all odds. The economic engine of the ancient world was not powered by kings or empires alone, but by the humble merchant ship. To understand its true limits, we must move from grand expeditions to the daily grind of commerce. A perfect window into this world was opened by a shipwreck off the coast of Cyprus, the Kyrenia ship. This small Greek merchant vessel, dating to the 4th century before the Common Era, was remarkably preserved. Its reconstruction offered archaeologists a rare chance to test not just seaworthiness, but the very economics of ancient trade. This replica, named Kyrenia Liberty, became a floating calculator. Every detail was measured. How many amphorae, those classic ceramic jars, could it practically hold without becoming unstable? How did its single square sail perform against the predictable meltemi winds of the Aegean Sea? How many hands were absolutely necessary to manage the lines, steer, and handle cargo, because each extra crew member meant less space for profit and more mouths to feed? The experiments painted a picture of meticulous calculation. The ship was not built for open ocean heroics. It was a coastal workhorse designed for a specific and risky business model. Sailing performance tests revealed it could make good speed downwind, but was painfully slow when tacking against the wind. This wasn't a design flaw. It was a defining constraint. The voyages of the Kyrenia ship were not journeys of exploration, but of tightly scheduled delivery. Researchers could map its optimal routes, island hopping from Anatolia to Rhodes to Cyprus, always using the seasonal winds as a one-way system. The findings pointed to a narrow and unforgiving calendar. The safe sailing window in the Mediterranean was perhaps only 6 or 7 months of the year. To venture out during the stormy winter months was not just dangerous, it was likely economic suicide, risking the entire cargo and the ship itself. Each voyage's potential profit margin was slim, balanced precariously against the costs of the vessel, the crew's wages, and the cargo's value. A single spoiled shipment of olive oil or a week lost to contrary winds could erase a season's earnings. This experimental reconstruction revealed ancient trade as a high-stakes puzzle, solved not by bravery alone, but by profound knowledge of local seas, strict timing, and brutal arithmetic. The sea set the schedule, and profit was a reward for respecting its limits. But the most profound gap we face is not in the blueprints, it is in the very substance of the ships themselves. We can replicate the shape of an ancient vessel with astonishing precision, yet still miss its essence because we have forgotten the language of its materials. The wood, the metal, the rope, these were not generic supplies. They were carefully selected and processed components of a living system, a technology honed over generations. Our modern industrial mindset, which values uniformity and speed, can blind us to the sophisticated, almost intuitive choices ancient shipwrights made. Take the classic mortise-and-tenon joinery of Greek and Roman ships, often called the ancestor of modern woodworking joints. We see the elegant puzzle piece connections in the wrecks and replicate them. But the first critical variable is the wood itself. A modern shipwright might reach for kiln-dried oak, stable and predictable. An ancient builder would have used green oak, freshly cut and still full of sap. In the water, that green wood would behave completely differently. It would swell, tightening every joint into a watertight seal in a way kiln-dried wood simply cannot. The entire hull would gain flexibility, allowing it to work with the waves like a living creature rather than fighting them as a rigid structure. Our modern replica, built with seasoned timber, might be stronger by a textbook definition, yet far less suited to the dynamic stresses of the sea. The same principle applies to the metal fastenings. We might use mass-produced steel nails, identical and strong. An ancient ship used hand-forged iron nails, each one slightly unique. More importantly, the ancient blacksmith could control the iron's carbon content, creating a nail that was tough but not brittle, one that could flex slightly under pressure. A modern steel nail, while stronger in a laboratory test, might be too rigid, transferring shock directly into the surrounding wood and causing it to split. These are not minor details, they are the foundational grammar of seaworthiness. Every time we substitute a modern material based on our assumptions of superiority, we risk building a ship that looks right but behaves wrong. The replica may sail, but it will not move as the original did. It will not whisper the same secrets to the helmsman or sigh with the same flexibility in a swell. This materials problem forces a humbling realization. The ancients were not just builders, they were master material scientists. Their knowledge was not written in books, but embedded in the grain of the wood and the temper of the iron, a wisdom passed from hand to hand, now largely silent. To hear it again, we must learn to ask not just how they built, but why they chose this specific tree, cut at this specific season, joined with this specific metal. The true reconstruction begins not in the shipyard, but in the forest and the forge. The iconic Viking Longship, with its dragon-headed prow slicing through icy spray, seems the very symbol of limitless seaborne power. We envision these vessels appearing without warning on any shore, a terrifying force of nature. But experimental reconstructions, most famously the Sea Stallion from Glendalough, have forced a dramatic reappraisal of this myth. This full-scale replica of a 30-meter warship, built using 900-year-old techniques and sailed from Denmark to Ireland and back, became a laboratory for understanding Viking mobility. The results were both awe-inspiring and sharply defining. In open water trials, the Sea Stallion confirmed what sagas hinted at. With a strong wind at its back, the Longship was a marine predator of unmatched speed, capable of surges that could outrun almost any contemporary vessel. Its shallow draft allowed it to beach on any sandy coast, making raids seem sudden and unstoppable. This raw performance downwind fed the legend of their omnipresence. Yet the sea, as always, demanded a trade-off. The same sleek, shallow hull that granted such speed became a liability when the wind shifted. Sailing against the wind, a maneuver called beating to windward, was a grueling, inefficient struggle for the Longship. Its square sail, optimized for a following wind, could not angle sharply enough to make meaningful progress upwind. The vessel would make agonizingly slow headway, losing vast distances sideways with each tack. This single technical limit reshapes our entire map of Viking activity. They were not masters of the open ocean in all conditions. They were masters of the seasonal highway. Their famed routes across the North Sea to Britain or through the Baltic followed predictable corridors of prevailing winds and currents. Their raiding calendar was not random violence, but a precise exploitation of a narrow weather window, typically the late spring and summer months when winds blew favorably toward wealthy coasts. To attempt a crossing against the seasonal flow would have been an exhausting, potentially disastrous voyage of attrition. Their success relied not on defying the ocean's rules, but on possessing an intimate, generational knowledge of its rhythms. They knew which coastal eddies could help slide them along a lee shore, and they could read the signs of an impending shift in the weather with a survivalist's acuity. The Longship was not a magical key to every coastline. It was a specialized tool, perfect for rapid strikes along a predictable network of sea roads when the time was right. When the wind turned contrary, even the fiercest Viking crew found their range abruptly shortened, their world suddenly bounded by the same elemental forces that constrained all ancient mariners. The most elegant ship is utterly lost without a way to guide it. This final frontier of experimental archaeology confronts the navigation enigma. How did ancient mariners without compasses, charts, or clocks find a speck of land in a vast, featureless ocean? To answer this, modern researchers have embarked on voyages using only the tools described in sagas and oral traditions, deliberately blinding themselves to modern positioning. They have tested legendary methods like the Viking Sun Stone, a piece of calcite crystal that can reveal the sun's position even through thin cloud or haze by polarizing light. They have sailed by memorized star paths where the rising and setting of specific constellations act as celestial signposts. They have watched for the flight patterns of seabirds, knowing certain species fly toward land at dusk. The results are a testament to human ingenuity and a stark map of its boundaries. These techniques work, but they demand an unbroken, exhausting vigil. A single overcast night can erase the star map. A week of fog turns the world into a gray, disorienting prison. The primary limit these experiments reveal is not of skill, but of visibility. Ancient navigation was a continuous, real-time puzzle solved with environmental clues that could vanish without warning. This constant vulnerability led to the widespread use of a brilliant, pragmatic strategy known as latitude sailing. It was a workaround born of limitation. A navigator would first sail directly north or south, using the sun or pole star to find a specific latitude, a line of constant distance from the equator. Once on that line, they would simply turn east or west and sail straight, keeping the celestial marker at a fixed angle in the sky. They were essentially sailing along an invisible track in the ocean. This method did not require knowing precise longitude, an impossible calculation without accurate timekeeping. It only required maintaining a constant heading. This single technological limit fundamentally shaped the geography of exploration and trade. It explains why so many ancient routes look like stair steps on a map, moving north to a latitude, then east across an ocean, then north again. It made certain islands, like the Azores or the Canaries, vital stepping stones because they lay on known latitudes where a weary crew could reliably find land after a long westward run. The sea allowed passage, but only on the terms its celestial patterns provided. The courage to sail into the blue was always balanced by the profound relief of finding that expected shore right where the stars promised it would be. The reconstructed Trireme Olympias is a stark monument to human energy. This sleek, oar-powered warship, built in the 1980s based on ancient Greek designs, was not built to test trade or exploration. Its purpose was to measure the raw, screaming limit of muscle-powered warfare at sea. With 170 rowers arranged in 3 staggered levels, the vessel was a machine of breathtaking complexity. Each man, for they were all men in the ancient tradition, had to pull in perfect unison, their oars entering and leaving the water as a single, fluid weapon. The coordination required was not merely physical, it was psychological, a shared rhythm beaten out by a hortator, a crewman who set the punishing pace with drum or voice. When that rhythm was perfect, the results were terrifying. In short, controlled bursts, Olympias could achieve speeds close to 9 knots, a sudden explosive acceleration meant to drive a bronze ram into an enemy hull. This was the ancient world's equivalent of a tactical sprint, a violent, decisive maneuver, but the sea, as always, demanded payment for such power. The experiments revealed a brutal truth. That extreme speed was a fleeting resource, draining the rower's strength in minutes. Sustaining even a moderate cruising speed for an hour left the crew exhausted and drenched in sweat, their muscles burning with lactic acid. The ship itself, built for speed and agility, was dangerously light and shallow. In trials, it proved alarmingly unstable in anything but the calmest seas. A moderate swell or a strong crosswind could make the vessel roll and wallow, threatening to dip the lower bank of oars into the water and snap them like twigs. This instability imposed a strict weather window on naval operations. The mighty Athenian fleet, which dominated the Aegean, was fundamentally a fair weather force. Perhaps the most humbling discovery was logistical. 170 men required vast amounts of fresh water, far more than could be practically stored on board. The Trireme was not a long-range cruiser. It was a coastal predator forced to crawl onto a friendly beach almost every single night. The crew would disembark to eat, sleep, refill water skins, and make minor repairs. This nightly grounding ritual completely rewrites our understanding of naval power projection. A famous tactic like the Athenian blockade of a hostile port was not a continuous, unbroken ring of ships. It was a rotating shift. Squadrons would patrol for a day, then retreat to a nearby beach camp at dusk, their place taken by fresh ships. The blockade was a logistical ballet, utterly dependent on controlling a stretch of coastline for these nightly respites. The Trireme's legendary power was thus confined to a narrow coastal strip, its reach defined not by the courage of its rowers, but by the location of the next safe beach and the endurance of the human body. The ocean allowed these bursts of phenomenal violence, but only on the condition that the warriors returned to the shore again and again to recover. These individual limits of material, design, and navigation all converge on one inescapable reality. The ancient sea was not a constant. It was a place of seasons, and the most successful mariners were those who learned to live by its calendar. By synthesizing the hard-won data from multiple replica voyages, experimental archaeology has delivered a definitive verdict. It has empirically confirmed what ancient texts from Homer to the Roman agricultural writer Vegetius had long warned. There was a time to sail and a time to stay on land. The idea of year-round travel across the open Mediterranean or the North Atlantic is a modern myth. The reconstructed ships themselves have measured the specific, accumulating dangers that close the sea each autumn. First, the weather itself shifts. Historical records speak of Mare Clausum, the closed sea, and the replicas have felt why. The frequency and ferocity of storms increases dramatically. A vessel like the Kyrenia merchantman, stable enough for summer hops, becomes a vulnerable cork in winter swells. The Olympias Trireme, already unstable in a light chop, would be utterly unmanageable. But it is not just about surviving a gale. The secondary effects are insidious. Poor visibility from rain, fog, and overcast skies strips away the navigator's essential tools. The sunstone becomes useless, the stars vanish. Sailing becomes a blind drift. Shorter days compound this, leaving fewer hours of precious daylight to make headway or spot landmarks. Then there is the silent drain on the crew. Colder temperatures and constant dampness sap strength, increase the risk of illness, and demand more food just to maintain body heat. On a replica voyage attempting a late-season crossing, researchers documented how morale and physical stamina plummeted far faster than on a summer journey, even without a major storm. Every decision became slower, every mistake more likely. This collective evidence paints a clear picture. The safe sailing window in much of the ancient world was shockingly narrow, perhaps only from April or May through September. This profound environmental limit imposed an annual rhythm on all of ancient civilization. Trade was not continuous. It was a summer frenzy of loading, sailing, and unloading before the autumn equinox. Warfare, especially naval campaigns, had to be planned and concluded within this same window. The famous Athenian siege of Syracuse failed in part because it stretched too late into the year. Even communication between empires slowed to a crawl, with messages waiting months for the first safe spring passage. The sea did not connect people 12 months a year. It connected them only when it allowed, creating a pulsed, seasonal heartbeat for the ancient world that no amount of human ingenuity could override. But the ocean's limits were not imposed by weather and waves alone. A far more insidious enemy waited beneath the surface, one that could devour a mighty ship from the inside out. For ancient mariners, the greatest threat to their vessel's longevity was not a sudden storm, but a slow, silent consumption. This enemy was the shipworm, a mollusk whose scientific name, Teredo nivalis, literally means the navigator's borer. In theoretical studies of ship design, this biological factor is often a footnote, but for experimental reconstructions left in the water for more than a single season, it became a terrifying headline. When researchers monitored unprotected wooden hulls, the data was grim. These small creatures, no thicker than a finger, would bore into the planks, creating vast, honeycombed networks of tunnels. From the outside, the hull might look intact. Inside, it was being transformed into a fragile sponge, losing its structural integrity with shocking speed. A ship left in warm, coastal waters for a year without protection could be rendered completely unseaworthy, its backbone eaten away by millions of tiny jaws. This was an invisible expiration date stamped on every wooden vessel. The discovery of this rapid decay through long-term replica studies reveals one of the most profound and constant pressures on ancient maritime life. It forced a brutal triage of options, each with heavy costs. The first and simplest was frequent beaching. Pulling a ship completely out of the water, a practice called careening, was essential maintenance. This allowed crews to scrape off marine growth and, more critically, expose the hull to air to dry out and kill any shipworm larvae. But this meant the ship was not earning money or projecting power during this downtime. For a merchant, it was lost trade. For a navy, it was a warship sitting idle. The second option was acceptance. Some cultures likely built ships with the understanding they were semi-disposable, designed for a few seasons of intense use before being replaced. This required a vast, continuous investment in timber and skilled labor, a huge drain on any economy. The third option was a technological arms race against the worm. The ancient Romans, among others, developed an expensive but effective solution. They sheathed their most important hulls in thin sheets of lead, fastened with copper nails. This created a toxic barrier the worms could not penetrate. Other methods included coating hulls in pitch, wax, or even a mixture of tar and animal hair. Each of these solutions added significant expense and weight. This biological limit, therefore, did not just rot wood. It directly shaped naval strategy, trade economics, and even imperial reach. A fleet that could afford lead sheathing, like Rome's, could remain on station for longer periods, enabling sustained blockades and faster response times. A merchant operating on thin margins might risk a worm-riddled hull for one more profitable run, gambling his life against the integrity of the timber beneath his feet. The need for safe, accessible beaches for careening dictated which coastlines were viable for regular travel and which were not. The shipworm, an organism few sailors ever saw, was a silent partner in every maritime venture, setting a relentless clock that no human courage could reset. It reminds us that the challenges of ancient seafaring were a constant siege, from the macro scale of a hurricane down to the microscopic gnawing in the dark. The silent clock of shipworms and winter storms defined seafaring in the enclosed Mediterranean. But to understand the ultimate expression of ancient wayfinding, we must look to the vastest ocean of all. The Pacific covers nearly a third of our planet, a blue desert dotted with islands so remote they seem impossible to find. For centuries, Western scholars clung to a comforting theory. They suggested the settlement of Polynesia was not a deliberate achievement, but an accident, the result of helpless fishermen blown off course and stumbling upon new land. This theory was upended not by a new archaeological dig, but by a canoe. In the 1970s, a group in Hawaii built Hokule'a, a reconstruction of a traditional Polynesian double-hulled voyaging canoe. This vessel was not designed to test limits of failure, but to prove a profound capability. Its voyages would resurrect an art thought lost, a navigation system that used no instruments, no maps, and no written language. The navigator, called a PWO, sits or stands in the open hull, becoming a living sensor. They do not look down at a compass, they feel the ocean itself. They learn the specific rhythm and direction of swells refracted around distant islands, a practice called wave piloting. They memorize a star compass, where the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars create a mental grid across the entire sky. They watch for the specific flight patterns of homing birds at dusk, knowing certain species will fly toward land to roost. They read the color of clouds and the taste of the wind. On its first historic voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976, using only these methods, Hokule'a found its target after a month at sea. This was no accident. It was a masterful demonstration of intentional exploration. The experiment revealed that the Pacific was not a barrier, but a pathway, crossed and recrossed by generations of the world's greatest navigators. The limit revealed here was not in their technology or skill, but in our modern imagination. We had underestimated the depth of their environmental literacy. Yet even these masters operated within a final, inexorable boundary. The double-hulled canoe, with its twin prows and woven sails, was supremely stable and could sail remarkably close to the wind. But it could not manufacture food or fresh water. Every voyage was a race against depletion. The crew had to carry all provisions for a journey that could last many weeks, storing sweet potatoes, dried fish, and coconuts in the hulls, and collecting rainwater with sails. The true frontier was not the empty horizon, but the capacity of the vessel itself. A navigator might know the precise star path to a new island, but if the journey exceeded the lifespan of their supplies, the knowledge was useless. This provisioning limit created a very real bubble of exploration. Voyages were planned with meticulous understanding of seasonal rains and known island chains where they could replenish. It meant that the settlement of the Pacific, while deliberate, likely occurred in cautious, calculated leaps, each new island becoming a stepping stone and a new source of sustenance for the next journey. The Hokule'a and its successors did more than solve a historical mystery. They restored a living culture, proving that the greatest limit ancient mariners faced was sometimes only the disbelief of those who came after. Yet this leaves us with a final, haunting question. We can reconstruct the ship with near-perfect fidelity, and we can train modern crews to use its tools. But can we ever truly rebuild the sailor? This is the unreproducible factor of ancient seamanship, the invisible boundary that even the most rigorous experimental archaeology may never fully cross. The gap lies not in the wood or the rope, but in the mind and muscle memory of the people who lived their entire lives within that wooden world. For a modern participant, sailing a replica is a project, an experiment with a defined beginning and end. They bring a lifetime of modern assumptions about physics, safety, and even the very nature of the sea. For an ancient mariner, this knowledge was not learned, it was absorbed from childhood. It was an embodied tradition. The feel of a rope beginning to fray under tension was not a fact from a manual, but a sensation in the palms passed down from a father or uncle. The subtle shift in a swell pattern that signaled a hidden reef or a change in current was a language learned not in weeks, but over decades of watching and listening. This was a cultural knowledge so deep it became instinct. A modern crew can be taught to navigate by the stars, but an ancient navigator lived within that star compass. The night sky was not a map he consulted, it was the ceiling of his home. This distinction points to perhaps the greatest limit of the experimental method itself. We are testing the machine, but we can only approximate the millennia of cumulative, tacit wisdom that operated it. We can measure how fast a trireme can row, but we cannot measure the unspoken communication between 170 men who rowed together season after season, who could sense a drop in rhythm from a single bench 3 levels down. We can log the performance of a square sail in various winds, but we cannot replicate the intuitive, split-second adjustments a seasoned helmsman made based on the song of the wind in the rigging, a song he had heard since boyhood. This means some performance ceilings of these ancient vessels may remain permanently invisible to us. There might have been techniques for handling a storm or riding a current that were never written down, because they were as natural as breathing to those who knew them. They died with the last practitioners of that specific maritime culture. Our replicas give us an extraordinary window into the past, but they also show us the silhouette of what is forever lost. They remind us that the ultimate boundary in understanding ancient seafaring is not the horizon they sailed toward, but the profound depth of the human experience they carried within them. The silhouette of the medieval cog is a blunt statement of purpose. With its high, castle-like stern and single, massive square sail, it looks less like a graceful seabird and more like a floating fortress. For generations, historians viewed these vessels as the trucks of the Middle Ages, slow, lumbering, and unremarkable, their value lying solely in the sheer volume of cargo they could carry across the North Sea. But when modern shipwrights built full-scale replicas like the Ubina of Bremen and put them to sea, the data told a far more nuanced story. The experiments confirmed the cog's legendary stability and capacity. Its flat bottom and sturdy construction allowed it to sit heavily in the water, making it a formidable platform for carrying hundreds of barrels of salt, grain, or timber. In a following wind, with that vast sail catching the breeze fully, it could make respectable speed. The assumption of pure sluggishness was shattered. Yet the sea, in its relentless testing, revealed the cog's true constraint. It was not a limit of speed but of direction. The ship's windward performance, its ability to sail against or across the wind, was abysmal. That high stern acted like a barn door, catching the wind and pushing the bow off course. The single square sail could not be angled effectively, making progress into a headwind a miserable, sideways drift known as leeway. This single characteristic did not make the cog obsolete. It defined the entire rhythm of medieval northern European commerce. A merchant could not simply point his cog toward a destination and go. He had to wait for the wind to blow from the right quarter, creating specific seasonal windows for eastbound and westbound travel. This fundamental inefficiency gave birth to one of history's most powerful commercial innovations, the convoy system. To mitigate the risk of being caught in a contrary wind, and for protection from pirates, cogs would sail together in fleets, all departing at the same time when the seasonal winds, like the reliable westerlies of autumn, finally turned favorable. This practice was formalized by the Hanseatic League, the powerful trade network that dominated the Baltic. They did not just trade goods, they traded in predictability. The League published sailing schedules, dictating when convoys would assemble and depart from key ports like Lübeck or Bruges. The entire economy of Northern Europe began to pulse to this maritime calendar. Markets timed their goods for the fleet arrivals, taxes were levied based on convoy schedules, and treaties were negotiated around safe passage for these lumbering flocks of cogs. The ship's design flaw, its poor windward ability, thus forged a system of incredible organizational power. It revealed that the limits of technology are not always dead ends. Sometimes they are the very pressures that force human societies to coordinate, to schedule, and to build complex networks of trust and timing, turning a simple weakness in sailing performance into the foundation of a commercial empire. This pursuit of ancient limits leads to a modern, deliberate danger. In the controlled environment of experimental archaeology, researchers do not simply wait for a storm. They sometimes steer their priceless replicas directly toward one. This practice, known as stress testing, is the most direct way to answer questions that historical records often leave silent. What was the exact wind strength that could shred a linen sail? What wave height would cause a mortise-and-tenon joint to finally groan and pull apart? Ancient sailors learned these thresholds through catastrophic, often tragic, experience. Modern researchers, armed with sensors and safety protocols, seek to measure them. Before any such voyage, teams establish strict ethical and operational boundaries. The vessel is fitted with strain gauges, waterproof cameras, and motion sensors. A detailed safety plan is paramount, with escort ships and clear abort criteria to ensure no one is put in unreasonable peril. The goal is not to destroy the ship, but to find the edge of its performance envelope, to witness how it fails so we can understand how ancient builders tried to prevent it. One famous test involved a replica of a 16th century caravel, a ship type used by explorers like Columbus. Sailed into a controlled storm front, the experiment revealed a critical weakness not in the hull but in the rigging. Under the extreme load of a sudden squall, the hemp ropes holding the yards, the horizontal spars that carry the sails, stretched and creaked alarmingly. The data showed that a specific knot, tied exactly as historical manuals dictated, could slip under a sustained load that a modern synthetic rope would easily handle. This single point of failure, a slipping knot in a storm, could have led to a yard crashing down, tearing sails, and leaving a ship helpless. This kind of finding provides a dynamic, physical context for archaeological evidence. When divers examine a real shipwreck scattered across the seabed, they see the final, static result. The stress test shows the process. It explains why the wreck's rigging artifacts are found in a particular pattern, suggesting a sudden, violent collapse from above rather than a gradual breaking up on rocks. Another test on a replica Greek merchant ship focused on hull integrity. By sailing it into steep, closely spaced waves, researchers observed how the entire structure flexed and worked. They identified the precise areas, like where the keel joins the sternpost, that experienced the greatest stress. Over many simulated voyages, these are the points where leaks would first develop. This directly correlates with the archaeological study of ancient hull remains, where we often see extra reinforcing in those exact locations, evidence of a design evolution forged by hard-learned lessons at sea. Each controlled crisis teaches us that ancient shipwrecks were rarely random acts of a cruel ocean. They were the culmination of specific, measurable forces overcoming equally specific points of resistance. A storm did not simply sink a ship. It exploited a known vulnerability, a trade-off the builders had accepted for speed or capacity. These deliberate voyages into rough seas allow us to read the ocean's oldest accident reports not as mysteries, but as physics. But a perfect replica requires a perfect blueprint, and the ancient world rarely provides one. The most honest limitation faced by experimental archaeology is not the sea, but the silence of the evidence itself. Every reconstruction begins with a shipwreck, a time capsule shattered by centuries on the seabed. What archaeologists recover is often a heartbreakingly incomplete puzzle. They may find the lower hull beautifully preserved in silt, but the upper works, the mast, the rigging, the sails, have almost always vanished, eaten by worms or scattered by currents. This forces researchers into a realm of educated guesswork. How tall was the mast? What was the exact shape and size of the sail? How was the steering oar or rudder configured? These are not minor details. They are the very controls of the ship. From the same skeletal remains, two different teams of experts, using the same archaeological data, can envision two completely different vessels. A famous example comes from ancient Egypt. Researchers studying models and reliefs of Nile riverboats have proposed various sail shapes, from broad squares to tall, narrow forms. Without a single preserved rigging block or sail fragment, each proposal is plausible. If built, each replica would handle the wind in a uniquely different way, one perhaps excelling downriver, another better at tacking across it. This divergence is not a failure of science. It is a revelation. Experimental archaeology, in these cases, does not produce a single answer. Instead, it maps a spectrum of possibility. It shows us that there may have been multiple solutions to the same maritime challenge, regional variations lost to time. When two replicas built from the same wreck perform differently, one perhaps more stable and the other faster, they are not contradicting each other. They are illustrating the boundaries of our knowledge, highlighting the creative space in which ancient shipwrights themselves operated. The sea tests our hypotheses, but the fragmented past reminds us that we are often testing just one version of a story that may have had several chapters. This humility is perhaps the most valuable lesson. It transforms our understanding from a fixed snapshot into a living conversation with the deep, where every answer is provisional and every voyage, even a failed one, adds another piece to an unfinished map. Rome was a city of 1,000,000 mouths, all demanding bread. This staggering need created the most critical maritime supply line in the ancient world, a lifeline stretching over 1,000 miles from the wheat fields of Egypt to the wharves of Ostia. To understand the true scale of this operation, we must step aboard the Roman corbitus, a hulking grain freighter. Modern reconstructions and computer models based on shipwrecks have turned these vessels into floating calculators, measuring the hard limits of logistics that could make or break an empire. Primary question was brutally simple. How much grain could one ship actually deliver? The numbers, once crunched, are humbling. A large corbitus might carry around 1,000 tons of wheat in its cavernous hold. That sounds immense until you do the math for a city of 1 million. One ship's cargo could feed the entire population for perhaps 3 days. That single fact transforms our understanding from a story of ships to a story of systems. The need was so vast it becomes a physics problem. The experiments then layer on the harsh realities of the journey itself. Sailing trials with replica hull forms revealed these heavy freighters were not fast. Dependent on favorable winds, the voyage from Alexandria to Rome could take anywhere from 1 to 3 months. Every day at sea was a race against a silent enemy, spoilage. Grain stored in the dark, damp hold would heat, ferment, and attract pests. Studies estimate a loss of at least 10% on a long voyage, a mountain of rotten wheat simply thrown overboard. Then factor in the crew. A ship of this size required a team of at least 20 men just to manage the sails and pumps, all of whom needed food, water, and wages, further cutting into the effective payload. When you compile the data, the logistical picture that emerges is one of breathtaking, fragile scale. To keep Rome fed year-round required not a handful of ships, but a continuous, overlapping convoy. Historians now estimate a minimum of 800 to 1,000 shipments arriving annually, meaning at any given moment, scores of these vulnerable vessels were on the water, traversing a sea known for sudden autumn storms. This was not merely a trade route. It was a sprawling, slow-moving pipeline where a break in the chain meant hunger, riots, and political collapse. The limit revealed by the corbitus is a limit of sheer volume and timing. It shows that the Roman Empire's greatest strength, its concentrated urban population, was also its greatest vulnerability. The empire could only expand as far as its fleets could reliably supply it, and its stability rested entirely on the steady, rhythmic beat of sails on the horizon, bringing the harvest of a distant province to the heart of power. The true power of these reconstructions lies in their ability to translate ancient whispers into modern numbers. By outfitting replicas with digital sensors and GPS, researchers have moved beyond compelling stories to gather cold, hard performance data. They measure maximum speed under sail, the precise angle a ship can hold against the wind, and its alarming sideways drift known as leeway. They clock turning radius and even stopping distance, metrics that sound technical but paint a vivid picture of life at sea. This quantitative data transforms our understanding from a qualitative guess into a set of empirically derived constraints. For the first time, we can calculate with sobering precision the real-world boundaries ancient mariners navigated every single day. Take the critical concept of leeway. A replica Greek merchant ship under full sail might make 5 knots forward, but sensors reveal it is also sliding 2 full knots sideways, pushed by the wind like a car skidding on ice. This single data point reshapes geography. It tells us exactly how close a captain could dare to sail along a dangerous lee shore, a coastline where the wind is pushing him directly onto the rocks. If his ship drifted 2 knots sideways, he would need to stay miles farther out to sea than a modern yacht captain would, fundamentally altering which coastal routes were considered safe and which were suicidal. This data directly explains the settlement patterns we see in the archaeological record. Ancient harbors were not just convenient. They were often positioned on coastlines with favorable winds that minimized this deadly sideways drift during the final approach, a life-saving calculation now proven by numbers. The tactical implications for warfare are even more striking. Instrumented trials with the Trireme Olympias provided stunning data on its agility. In a calm sea, it could execute a 180-degree turn in less than a minute, within a space barely longer than the ship itself. This explains the devastating Deeplis maneuver described in ancient texts, where a column of triremes would slice through an enemy line, turn with impossible sharpness, and ram the vulnerable sides of opposing ships before they could react. But the same data set a brutal limit. That tight turn required the peak output of 170 elite rowers at a sprint pace. It was a single, explosive gambit. After such a maneuver, the rowers would be spent, and the ship would be nearly dead in the water, vulnerable to a counterattack. The data quantifies the high-stakes gamble of ancient naval combat. Victory was not about sustained power, but about perfectly timing that one, instrument-measured burst of energy. These numbers also define the rhythm of trade and exploration. The average sustainable speed for a merchant cog on a long haul might only be 3 or 4 knots. Factor in the seasonal windows for safe travel, and you can map the maximum economic range of a trading network. A merchant operating out of Rome could calculate, based on replica performance data, that a round trip to Alexandria with a full cargo would consume the entire safe sailing season. There was no time for a second voyage. This turns each journey into a single annual investment of everything a merchant owned. The stopping distance data is perhaps the most quietly terrifying. A large sailing ship under full canvas, even with sails dropped, takes hundreds of yards to lose its momentum. In a sudden fog near an uncharted coast, this simple physics meant that seeing a cliff face often meant it was already too late. The quantitative data from these floating laboratories does not just tell us how ancient ships moved. It reveals the narrow margins within which entire civilizations moved, where every mile per hour of speed and every degree of drift was measured against the immutable mathematics of survival. The numbers from sensors tell only part of the story. Beyond the physics of hull and sail lies a more complex equation, one written in human relationships. Every ancient voyage began not at the dock, but within a community. Experimental archaeology has quantified this social limit by determining the minimum and optimal crew sizes for different vessels, revealing that the ability to assemble and sustain a team was as critical as the ship itself. For each ship type, the required crew created a unique social contract, a specific demand on the society that built it. Take the Viking Longship. Its design demanded a crew of warriors, but not just any fighters. They had to be warriors who could also row in perfect unison for hours, men bound by loyalty and shared endurance. A ship like the Sea Stallion required around 60 such individuals. This was not a random raiding party. It was a self-contained military unit, a floating slice of a chieftain's power. The social limit here was the chieftain's ability to gather, equip, and inspire a band of this size, men willing to trade months of grueling labor for a share of glory and plunder. The vessel's range was defined as much by the cohesion of this group as by the wind. If descent or exhaustion fractured their unity, the voyage was over. The scale jumps dramatically with the Athenian trireme. Its 170 rowers represented a staggering social investment. This was not a volunteer crew of enthusiasts. It was a logistical operation only a city-state could manage, requiring a system to conscript, train, pay, and feed hundreds of citizens from the lower economic classes. The trireme was not merely a weapon of war, it was a manifestation of Athenian democracy and bureaucracy in action. Its power projection was limited by the state's ability to manage this human machinery, to replace tired men at the end of a day's patrol, and to maintain the social compact that kept them at the oars. When that social contract broke down, as it did during the long, disastrous Sicilian expedition, the mighty fleet became a stranded liability. For the humble merchant cog, the social limit was financial and cooperative. A single vessel represented a massive capital investment. Few individuals could afford to build and outfit one alone. Instead, they were typically funded by a group of investors, a medieval partnership spreading the risk. The crew, smaller than a warship's but still requiring specialized sailors, a carpenter, and a merchant's agent, had to function as a hierarchical but cooperative unit for months. Trust was the invisible rigging. The captain had to trust the navigator, the investors had to trust the captain to not abscond with the goods, and the crew had to trust they would be paid. A voyage could be doomed by embezzlement, cowardice, or simple interpersonal conflict long before a storm ever hit. These experiments in crew dynamics reveal a profound truth. The ocean did not just test ships, it tested the social structures that launched them. A culture's maritime reach was ultimately bounded by its ability to organize people, to forge common purpose from dozens or hundreds of individual wills. The greatest ship ever built was useless as a heap of timber on a beach, waiting for a community to give it life, purpose, and a crew willing to face the horizon together. The story of naval innovation is not always a march toward the open ocean. Sometimes it is a deliberate turn inward toward the sheltered waters of home. In the Warring States period of medieval Japan, a unique vessel rose to dominate the coastal battles that decided the fate of clans. This was the Atakbune, a ship that looked less like a traditional wooden hull and more like a floating castle. Reconstructions and detailed models based on period drawings and records reveal a design built for one specific, brutal purpose. These were not explorers' ships. They were mobile fortresses, often fitted with iron plating along their sides to repel arrows and early firearms, and topped with multi-story wooden towers from which archers and soldiers could rain down fire on enemy vessels or shoreline positions. Their very appearance speaks of a formidable, localized power. Yet engineering analysis of their hull forms uncovers a profound limitation. The Atakbune was built for stability in calm water, not for sailing the open sea. Its hull was broad and flat-bottomed, giving it a solid platform for combat and for carrying many troops. But this same shape made it dangerously unstable in any kind of ocean swell. It had a shallow draft, perfect for operating in rivers and coastal shallows, but this made it vulnerable to being pushed sideways by strong winds. Most tellingly, its propulsion was often a combination of oars and sails that were inefficient for long-distance travel. When researchers model these ships in simulated open water conditions, the result is clear. In anything beyond the sheltered waters of Japan's Seto Inland Sea or its major rivers, the Atakbune would wallow and become unmanageable, a sitting duck for the weather itself. This was not a design flaw. It was a perfect adaptation to a strict geographical limit. The theater of naval conflict in feudal Japan was confined. The great clashes were over control of strategic bays, river mouths, and the sheltered channels between islands. There was no need for a blue water navy because the political and military objectives were all within sight of land. The Atakbune's design, therefore, is a masterclass in building exactly what the environment and the conflict demanded, and nothing more. It represents a pinnacle of specialized technology that could dominate its own world completely, yet would be utterly useless just a few miles beyond it. The ship's limit was the horizon of its own necessity, proving that sometimes the most powerful vessel is the one designed to rule a pond, not to cross an ocean. Some of history's most elegant ship designs were evolutionary dead ends. The experimental record is filled with vessels that, when rebuilt and tested, revealed inherent flaws so severe they could only lead to abandonment. One clear example comes from the steering oar, a technology used for millennia, on replicas of Egyptian riverboats or early Mediterranean traders. A single large steering oar mounted on the vessel's side proved effective in calm waters. But when these replicas were taken into open water with crosswinds or following seas, the limitation became stark. The single oar, acting as a giant lever on one side of the ship, required immense physical strength to hold a straight course. In a swell, water pressure could suddenly wrench the oar from the steersman's hands, leading to a dangerous loss of control. This functional ceiling explains why cultures engaged in long-distance sailing universally evolved toward the central stern-mounted rudder. It was not a lack of creativity that kept the steering oar in use on the Nile, but the fact it worked perfectly well there. The sea demanded a better solution, and experiments show us precisely why. Sail types tell a similar story of environmental fit and failure. The simple square sail, iconic on Viking longships and Roman merchantmen, excels at one thing: capturing wind from directly behind. Replica voyages have quantified its severe drawback. When the wind comes from the side or ahead, a square sail becomes almost useless for forward progress. A ship like a cog or a longship can be forced into a sideways drift, a leeway so extreme it can push the vessel miles off course in a single watch. This explains the long, patient wait in port for a favorable wind. By contrast, replica tests of lateen sails, the triangular rigs used in the Indian Ocean and later the Mediterranean, demonstrate their superior ability to sail closer to the wind. This was not a secret. Cultures using square sails certainly encountered lateen rigs through trade, yet the square sail persisted in the north for centuries. Why? Experiments suggest the answer is one of specialization and trade-offs. The square sail's rigging was simpler, stronger, and required fewer skilled crew to manage in the brutal weather of the North Sea. Its weakness upwind was a price paid for robustness in a storm. The lateen sail, while more maneuverable, had a more complex rig that could be vulnerable in high winds. Each design hit a different functional ceiling, one of directional flexibility, the other of brute force survival. Perhaps the most telling dead ends are found in hull shapes. The Pacific Proa, a swift outrigger canoe, is a masterpiece of balance and speed. Replicas like Hokule'a have proven its capabilities, yet its asymmetric design, with the outrigger always kept to windward, presents an operational complexity that limits its scale. Building a larger version, a proa capable of carrying massive cargo, introduces stability problems that hull forms like the double canoe or the broad-beamed cargo hull solved more effectively. Similarly, the ancient Greek trireme represents a peak in muscle-powered warfare, but its design was a prisoner of its own purpose. Reconstructions showed it was too light, too unstable, and too dependent on human fuel to be adapted for reliable trade or long-range exploration. It was a brilliant and terrifying sprinter, but it could never run a marathon. These experiments reveal that technological progress in shipbuilding was not a straight line. It was a branching tree where many promising limbs simply stopped growing. A design wasn't abandoned because people forgot how to build it. It was abandoned because when tested against the changing demands of trade, warfare, or new environments, it whispered back the same damning verdict: you cannot go further. The ocean, through these modern trials, shows us the walls of the maze our ancestors navigated, and why some paths, no matter how clever, ultimately led nowhere. But all these measured limits of wood, wind, and water converge on a final, invisible frontier, the psychological threshold. For all our sensors and data, we can never fully quantify the weight of true, uncharted emptiness on the human mind. Experimental voyages that strip away modern navigation, however, offer us a haunting glimpse. Crew logs from these journeys, sailing for weeks without a GPS signal or a confirmed landfall, speak in a different language. They document not just fatigue but a creeping strain on perception itself. The endless, identical horizon begins to play tricks. A distant cloud becomes a longed-for island. A trick of the light sparks a false alarm. The mind, desperate for a fixed point in a world of constant motion, starts to fabricate landmarks. This is the silent pressure ancient mariners lived with every day they sailed beyond the sight of a familiar coast. We can link this directly to the myths that ring every ancient sea. Tales of sea serpents, whirlpools that dragged ships to the underworld, and a literal edge of the world where the ocean cascaded into nothingness were not mere superstition. They were the natural folklore of profound disorientation, when your entire reality is a circle of heaving water and your survival depends on beliefs about what lies beyond. The mind fills the void with stories. The edge of the map was not just a geographical limit, it was a psychological one. It was the point where collective courage met collective dread. This is why the ultimate frontier for any ancient culture was not the strength of their ships, but the resilience of their sailors' spirits. An experimental voyage can make a modern crew tired, even anxious, but they carry an unshakable certainty that the world is round, that satellites are watching, and that rescue is a radio call away. An ancient crew held no such certainty. Their willingness to push into the blue, to trust the star paths when the last seabird had turned back, was the most critical resource of all. It was a cultural courage passed down in songs and navigational chants that said the ocean could be a road and not just a prison. While we can never fully replicate that ancient state of mind, these modern voyages of intentional vulnerability allow us to empathize. They let us feel, just for a moment, the immense quiet and the immense responsibility of being truly alone on the deep, where the only thing between you and the abyss is knowledge, faith, and the sound of your own heart against the hull. The Uluburan shipwreck is a time capsule of staggering wealth, resting on the seafloor off the coast of Turkey for over 3,000 years. When archaeologists began to recover its cargo, the inventory read like a ledger of the entire known world. 10 tons of copper ingots from Cyprus, a ton of tin, likely from Anatolia or beyond, glass ingots from Mesopotamia, ebony wood from Africa, ivory from elephant tusks, amber beads from the distant Baltic, gold jewelry, ostrich eggs, and pottery from Egypt, Mycenaean Greece, and Canaan. This single vessel was carrying a king's ransom in raw materials and finished luxury goods. Yet, when you study the ship itself, a profound contradiction emerges. The vessel that carried this global treasure was surprisingly small, only about 15 meters long, a humble coastal trader by modern standards. Detailed analysis of its hull construction, based on the preserved timbers, reveals a sturdy but limited craft. It was built using a sophisticated shell-first technique, with planks fastened together by mortise-and-tenon joints, a design that offered strength but not necessarily the capacity for a vast, open ocean voyage of thousands of miles. This single ship could not have possibly visited all the regions represented in its hold. It could not have sailed from the Baltic forests to collect amber, then down to Egypt for gold, over to Mesopotamia for glass, and then to Cyprus for copper. The physics of time, distance, and seasonal sailing windows make such a direct circuit impossible. So how did this incredible collection come to be aboard one modest boat? The answer rewrites our map of Bronze Age trade. The Uluburan's cargo is not evidence of globe-trotting merchants. It is the smoking gun for a complex relay-style network. Each precious item moved in stages, passed from hand to hand and ship to ship across a chain of trusted partners. A Baltic amber bead might travel down rivers to Central Europe, be traded to a Mycenaean merchant in a Greek port, then carried to a Levantine hub like Ugarit, where it was finally loaded onto the Uluburan alongside Cypriot copper destined for a pharaoh's court. The ship itself was a crucial link in this chain, not the entire chain. Its journey was likely a regional circuit, perhaps from a Levantine port to the Aegean and back, picking up and dropping off consignments at major trading entrepôts. This system reveals a fundamental limit of the era. Direct, long-distance travel by a single crew was not just dangerous, it was inefficient and unnecessary. The maritime world was a patchwork of overlapping zones of expertise. Sailors knew their home waters intimately, the local currents, safe harbors, and trading partners. They operated within a comfortable radius, perhaps a few hundred miles. To go farther meant entering a realm of unknown languages, unpredictable politics, and navigational hazards. The network solved this by specializing. The limit of an individual ship's range became the strength of the system as a whole. Goods could travel immense distances, but no single person witnessed the entire journey. This placed immense importance on the nodes, the port cities that acted as neutral trading grounds and warehouses. Places like Ugarit or Troy became cosmopolitan clearinghouses where goods changed custody, where deals were brokered using standardized weights and diplomatic languages. The Uluburan's sinking was therefore a localized tragedy with global ripple effects. It did not just sink a ship, it broke a link in a delicate and far-flung web, freezing a single moment in a process that connected Scandinavian forests to Egyptian palaces. Its reconstructed story tells us that ancient globalization was not achieved by heroic solo voyages, but by countless smaller handoffs, a testament to the human impulse to connect, even within the strict boundaries the sea imposed. So from these voyages of wood and will, a clear pattern emerges. We can now gather all these scattered lessons into 9 fundamental boundaries, the invisible walls of the ancient maritime world. First are the material and biological limits, the very substance of the ships, from green oak that swells to waterlogged reeds, set a hard expiration date. And beneath the waves, creatures like the shipworm waged a silent, relentless war of attrition against every hull. Second, the human physiological limits. No replica can fully reproduce the lifetime of muscle memory, but they starkly measure the drain of exhaustion, hunger, and thirst on a crew's ability to make flawless decisions day after grueling day. Third, the limits of navigational knowledge. The ancient toolkit of stars, waves, and birds was profound, but it was utterly vulnerable to clouds, fog, and the simple, terrifying loss of visibility. Fourth, the environmental and seasonal limits. The ocean was not a constant highway. It was a place with a strict calendar where the mare clausum, the closed sea of winter, was a reality enforced by storms, shorter days, and navigational darkness. Fifth, the economic and logistical limits. Every voyage was a precarious balance sheet. The capacity of a grain ship, the spoilage rate of its cargo, and the cost of its crew defined how far and how often trade could flow, turning profit into a reward for impeccable timing. Sixth, the social and organizational limits. A ship required a community. Its range was defined by a chieftain's ability to gather loyal warriors, a city-state's capacity to conscript and pay rowers, or a merchant guild's success in building trust among investors and crew. Seventh, the design and performance limits. Every hull shape and sail type represented a trade-off: speed against stability, cargo capacity against maneuverability, creating vessels that were masters of a specific niche but often helpless outside of it. Eighth, the psychological limits. Beyond the measurable strain was the weight of the unknown, the edge of the map where courage had to contend with a deep, cultural dread of the abyss. And ninth, we must acknowledge the limit of our own knowledge. Our replicas are brilliant hypotheses, but they are built from fragments. We test one possible version of a past that may have held many solutions now lost to time. This framework is not a story of confinement, but of context. Within this 9-sided box, ancient mariners were not prisoners. They were virtuosos. Their genius lay in knowing these limits intimately, in weaving their routes and their lives through the narrow gaps these boundaries allowed. They turned seasonal winds into scheduled convoys, biological decay into maintenance rituals, and navigational uncertainty into star paths of stunning precision. The sea set the rules, and they learned to play the game with a boldness that still takes our breath away. The true breakthrough often arrives not with a cheer, but with a groan of splitting timber. In this unique science, the moment a replica ship fails is the moment it speaks most clearly. A successful voyage confirms a hypothesis, but a dramatic failure provides something far more valuable, a direct physical correction. When a mast buckles under a gust that historical texts described as manageable, it tells us our understanding of ancient wood strength was wrong. When a carefully stitched sail tears along a seam we thought was secure, it reveals a flaw in our interpretation of the weaver's art. These are not setbacks, they are precious feedback loops from the past itself, closing gaps in our knowledge by demonstrating with undeniable force what simply could not have worked. Consider the process of caulking, the method used to seal the gaps between a ship's planks to make it watertight. Ancient sources might mention materials like oakum, which is hemp fiber soaked in tar, but they rarely detail the precise technique or the required thickness. A modern team, following their best guess, might carefully hammer the oakum into the seams. If the replica sails and stays dry, their guess appears validated. But if, after days at sea, a persistent leak develops along a specific seam, the ship itself is delivering a critical report. That leak points directly to a misunderstood variable, perhaps the need for a secondary layer of a different material, or a specific tooling technique to compact the fibers more densely. The failure becomes a diagnostic tool, narrowing the infinite possibilities of how it might have been done down to the few methods that actually hold against the ocean's pressure. Another powerful example comes from rigging failures. On a reconstruction of a medieval cog, researchers might install a yard, the horizontal spar that holds the sail, based on the dimensions of a single archaeological find. During a stress test, if that yard snaps under a load the sail should theoretically handle, the broken pieces become a data set. The fracture pattern shows the grain of the wood and the points of maximum stress. This physical evidence can then be cross-referenced with other archaeological finds, perhaps showing that the original artifact had subtle reinforcements or was made from a specific type of timber chosen for its flexibility. The broken modern replica teaches us why the ancient original was built the way it was. These dramatic events provide a clarity that static artifacts in a museum case never can. A beautifully preserved hull in a display tells us about construction, but a hull that springs a leak at sea tells us about performance and vulnerability. It translates abstract engineering principles into the lived experience of a crew desperately bailing water. Each failure is a boundary marker, definitively ruling out a path so that we can walk with more confidence down the one that remains. The sea, in its relentless testing, becomes the ultimate peer reviewer, rejecting flawed hypotheses with a wave of its hand and leaving us with a deeper, humbler, and far more accurate map of the past. The broken timbers of a failed replica teach us one hard truth, but they cannot teach us every possible truth. Physical reconstruction will always be the cornerstone, the undeniable proof of concept on real water. Yet its greatest constraint is its own reality. You can only build so many ships, and you can only risk them in so many storms. The future of understanding these ancient limits, therefore, is shifting from the shipyard to the server farm. A new frontier is opening through digital twins, perfect virtual replicas of ancient vessels modeled down to the grain of their timbers. Using advanced engineering software, researchers can now subject these digital hulls to an infinite battery of virtual stress tests. This is not about replacing the physical, but about expanding the conceivable. With computational fluid dynamics, scientists can simulate how 1,000 different variations of a Phoenician galley would slice through a digitally generated hurricane force wave. They can tweak the sail shape, adjust the mast position, or modify the hull curvature with a click, running each new design through a gauntlet of simulated ocean conditions that would take lifetimes and fortunes to test with wood and rope. This method, called finite element analysis, allows them to visualize the precise points of maximum stress on a virtual mortise-and-tenon joint, as a 40-foot wave crashes over the bow. They can watch, in slow motion, how forces propagate through the entire wooden skeleton, identifying weaknesses that might not appear until the 5th or 50th real-world voyage. The power of this digital archaeology is its capacity for safe, limitless experimentation. We can now ask and answer historical, what-if questions that were previously pure speculation. What if the Minoans had used a slightly different keel design? Would their ships have been able to venture farther into the Atlantic? What if the steering oar on a Roman merchantman was 3 feet longer? How would that have changed its handling in a following sea? These virtual models allow us to explore the entire spectrum of possibility that existed within ancient material science, mapping not just the single solution we think they used, but the broader envelope of solutions that were theoretically available to them. This refines our grasp of ancient limits with surgical precision. It helps us distinguish between a constraint imposed by their technology and a constraint imposed by a specific cultural or economic choice. The digital twin becomes a laboratory for the history of innovation itself, showing us the roads not taken and helping us understand, with new clarity, why our ancestors sailed the particular, remarkable ships that they did. These voyages of wood and rope have revealed a single, unifying truth. Ancient seafaring was not an act of conquest over the ocean, but a constant, delicate negotiation with it. Every journey was a high-stakes conversation between human ingenuity and a formidable list of constraints, from the gnawing of worms in the hull to the creeping doubt in a navigator's mind. What experimental archaeology has given us is not a smaller view of the past, but a far richer one. It has replaced the sweeping myth of fearless explorers with the nuanced reality of brilliant, pragmatic problem solvers. Their achievements were not diminished by the limits they faced, they were defined by them. The courage to sail was inseparable from the wisdom to know when to turn back. The skill to build a ship was matched by the social intelligence to gather a crew that could trust each other with their lives. This research has shown us that the boundaries of the ancient world were not blank spaces on a map, but a complex web of environmental deadlines, material explorations, and human endurance. Each replica, each floating hypothesis, teaches us that history is not merely a record of what people accomplished. It is the story of the specific, often invisible, walls they had to scale to accomplish anything at all. So the next time you look at a modern satellite map or hear of a new probe venturing into deep space, consider the parallel. Our own age of exploration is also shaped by limits, by the equations of fuel and life support, by the vast distances that strain communication. We too are building vessels, both physical and digital, to test the boundaries of our own possible. The ancient mariners whisper across the centuries a lesson in humility and resolve. True discovery begins not when we ignore our limits, but when we learn to navigate with immense skill and courage right up to the very edge of them.